Welcome this morning. It's good to see you. At this time, sometimes we have been dismissing our students, and we're not doing that today. We're staying in here. We are in the midst of some changes in our format of how we're doing our Sunday mornings with our high school and junior high ministries. And next week, we'll be starting in here and dismissing for the very last time as we're working toward our own service again. But we're glad to be here this morning. We're glad to have our students with us. Growing up, I know it doesn't show now, but growing up, I struggled gaining weight. I know, things change, things happen, and I got that vote of encouragement right there. But I got to tell you that in junior high, I never was able to quite breach that 100-pound mark. Man, I struggled with that. It kind of gets embarrassing at times. My 29 Slims were more like parachute pants, and man, a good stiff wind took me down. So it was tough at times. But I got to tell you, there were times I think I underestimated myself. I was thinking a couple stories that happened growing up, and my sister, who is 2 years older than me, we got along great. And I remember there were two times that someone picked on her. Someone, as we would say in modern terms, they were bullying her. And in both situations, the bully didn't fare so well. As a matter of fact, one punch, bloody nose, he was running. Both times, different guy. So I think I underestimated myself a little bit. That was the last two fights I ever had in all my life. Probably a good thing. But I guess as we think about, our society deals with this thing that we call bullying a lot. It has become a big issue, something that we're paying a lot closer attention to. It's not that it wasn't always there. It's just that we didn't pay as much attention to it, or we handled it differently. And we took matters into our own hands, and that kind of thing happens. But bullying on a bigger sense really is nothing more than rejection. It is a group of people choosing who fits in and who does not, and then in their way discovering how they're going to make that person pay for not quite fitting in. So rejection really is something that, on a bigger scale, we all really do understand. Now, maybe in our circumstance, it's a little bit different. Maybe some of us are experiencing rejection in our own home. Maybe it's a husband or a wife that doesn't understand us, and maybe they don't speak our love language. Maybe they just are mean people. Didn't come out until after marriage. Maybe in our own home, maybe it's a son or a daughter that just expresses their lack of desire to be home. Maybe it's a job that's been downsized. I mean, there are so many different ways that you and I experience this thing of rejection, but all of us understand the sting of it at some point. And this morning, as we look at our text, what I want to do is I want to counter that rejection that you and I get in the world with the unbelievable promise of God's unending love and acceptance in our lives. If you want to join me in the book of Luke, chapter number 15, I'm going to give a little bit of background before I actually read some of our text. But Jesus is going to give a series of three different stories, two of them a little bit shorter than the last, but all three of the stories have four things in common. Something valuable has been lost. The valuable thing is sought after. The valuable item is discovered or found, and then there is a celebration that happens. In all three of the stories that Jesus gives, those four elements are going to be discovered. And what we're going to find is that Jesus is revealing the heart of his Father for the lost world. But as he is standing there in that crowd, and the Bible says it this way, look at verse number 1. It says, "Then drew near unto him all the publicans and sinners for to hear him." In verse number 2, "And the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners and eateth with them." So we have two different crowds of people standing around Jesus right now. We have the sinners, the publicans and sinners, those who would be compared to, hate to say this, but you and I today. People who have made mistakes and recognize that they've made mistakes. People who have a list of regrets from the past. I think that all of us can understand that. And this group of people have gathered around Jesus to hear the Word of God because in Jesus they have found encouragement. They have found at least some hope. But mixed in that same crowd of people is another group of people that we know as the Pharisees. The Pharisees are critical and mean-spirited, and they're hate-filled. And they do not agree with, nor do they like the fact that Jesus has taken in these outcasts of the society, and he's showing kindness and love to them. And they gather around him, and they're kind of like, they're making him know. And do you know that really, in essence, they're bullies? They're spiritual bullies. They have determined what in their mind, outside of the Bible and its premises, they have discovered in their mind what they feel to be right and wrong, and if you don't measure up, they are going to eat you alive. And now they're in the crowd mixed in with the people Jesus is trying to reach. And they're complaining, and they're murmuring, and they're angry about what Jesus is doing. Our hope is that this same dark storm cloud that's gathering around Jesus at this point is not something that we see among us as believers. We hope that our perspective, that our response, that our relationship with people that don't know Christ is radically different than what we see in the Pharisees in our text this morning. And so Jesus is going to give these three stories to help us understand this. The first story he gives, it starts in verse number 4, and it's about a man with a lost sheep. This man is not called a shepherd because I believe that Jesus wants all of us to be able to step into this story, into this man's sandals, and feel what it means to lose something that's valuable to them. This man seems to get his sheep to a safe place at night, and he's doing his job, and all of a sudden he discovers he started with 100, and now he's down to 99, and he didn't even realize that one was gone. So he takes the 99, and he makes sure that they're safe and sound, and he makes his way back off into the wilderness to discover this one wayward sheep. You and I probably struggle with this a little bit. We would say, well, man, the percentages are pretty good. I mean, if you only lost 1 out of 100, that's pretty good numbers. I think I'm okay. I mean, why risk my own life? Why risk the safety possibly of the other 99 and go out and discover, try and find who knows where this sheep is? But this man does. And he makes his way back out into the wilderness. And the story tells us, Jesus tells us in the story that when he finds this sheep, he takes it and gently picks that sheep up, and he puts him around his neck, holding on to his feet, and he makes his way back to the other sheep. Talk about a tender story of love and acceptance. That sheep now draped around his shoulder, he's got his face up next to the shoulder of the rescuer, and they make their way back through the dangerous territory of wild animals and the elements that would have probably taken the life of the sheep. They make their way back, and this sheep is now safe, and the man celebrates. He has a genuine party and celebration of the fact that this sheep has been found. And this is a story of compassion and responsibility. It shows that God's love for each individual is so great that he seeks them out at all costs. I think that Jesus finishes his story and realizes that the critics in front of him aren't quite getting the story, so he moves right into the second one. It's the story of a woman with a lost coin. It starts in verse number 8, and the story is one of misfortune. The lady actually, by mistake, misplaced what she calls a coin. Now, I think that face value, you and I might lose the whole depth of what is going on here because we think, well, big deal, I've lost coins all the time. And you go through my car right now, dig in the seats, and find probably a fortune. I mean, if we took the cushions off of our couches, we'd probably find a lot. And that's where we miss what is actually happening in the story. See, in the Jewish culture, the coins were given to the women when they got married, and it was part of the dowry. And really what it was in our time would be equivalent of an engagement ring or a wedding ring. Now, I don't know if that might help you a little bit, get a little more grasp of the desperation that she has to find this ring. It's sentimental. It's important to her. So as soon as she realizes and recognizes that it's gone, it says that she lights a candle and she starts to scour through the house. And it says that she grabs a broom, and all of a sudden she starts to do the cleaning that she may not have done for quite some time. And with the dust flying and her heart pounding, she finally discovers that lost coin, that coin that she was looking for. I would guess that most of us probably have been in an experience like this at some point. I mean, I have misplaced my cell phone more times than I can count. My wallet has been found in many, many various places, which I don't remember placing it. And I think that probably all of us have been on a rapid search for our car keys before. We understand that initial and may not even remember where it was that we put it last. And that's the situation at this of desperation and of need. She was desperate, she was needy, and she went all out to discover the coin that she had misplaced and found. She celebrated when she found it. Now Jesus knows that the bullies standing around him still are not getting the picture. He moves into the final story, the one that probably everybody has heard, and that of the prodigal son. The prodigal son begins in verse number 11, and it's the story of a father with a wayward son, one that has made the decision to go off and to do his own thing. The story begins with a young and carelessly adventurous boy whose heart left the ranch long before his feet ever did. He wanted out. And he went to his father and he requested or demanded his portion of his inheritance. He said, "Dad, I want the money that I would get if you were dead right now." And he takes his portion of the money and off he goes to live his dreams. And the story goes on to tell us that he went to a city far from home. He lived his dream. He did everything he could do. He had a blast. He had a party. But it didn't last very long before the green grass on the other side of the fence turned brown. And he discovered that the dreams that he had weren't so great. He was homeless, he was hungry, and he was lonely. And he sat in the field one night and he thought to himself, you know what? If I were to go home and if my dad is anything like he used to be, if he hasn't changed at all, then my dad will accept me when I come back. He'll forgive me for what I've done. What a great testimony of a father. You know that whether it's us being a parent or whether it's us dealing with people, if we could help people, if we could have the integrity and the compassion that shows people that you can make mistakes, I'll work with you. If we would cease burning our bridges to people and throwing them under the bus when they make the slightest of mistakes, does that mean that we should condone what they're doing and just excuse it and say it's all okay? Well, no, obviously it's not. But what good does it do for us to pour on the condemnation to someone who already knows that they screwed up, right? And so Jesus in this story is showing through the father that the son's sitting there going, you know what, if I go back, I know my dad well enough. If I return, my dad will forgive me. My dad will take me back in because his love has always been a genuine love. And you know what, for us, if you're a mom, if you're a dad, you and I need to work tirelessly to build the kind of trust in our children that we will always love them, that we will always be there on their return if they choose to walk away. It's never easy. It's never something we want for them to do. But for them to return is always the option that they need to know is there. And so off he goes, comes back, realizes all that he messed up. And let's start reading in verse number 20. We're going to look at two different people upon his return. One is going to be, the first one is the forgiving father. In verse number 20 is where we'll start reading. It says, "And he arose and came to his father. And when he was a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said unto his servants, Bring forth the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and be merry, for my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. There's three things that we see in the heart of the Father this morning that I want us to be able to evaluate and see how we're doing ourselves. Number one, the Father was proactive. When the story shows, that it reveals that when the Son was somewhere in the distance, the Dad recognized that. I don't know how this worked because we're not given all the details of the story, but I have a sense that this dad was so desirous of his son's return and so hopeful that each night when they got done eating, I have the sense that he went outside and maybe with a cup of coffee, I don't know, maybe he sat on the porch, maybe he went to the split rail fence, but my sense is that he stood there as the sun was setting and just kind of watched the horizon that his son had disappeared over some time ago. And I have a sense that he was there waiting and watching, because when the story reveals that he was making his way down that dirt road, it says when he was a great way off, his dad saw him. And his dad recognized that walk of his son. He knew who it was. And this is what it says in verse number 20. It says, and when he was a great way off, his father saw him. And guess what he did? Well, let me tell you what he didn't do. He didn't sit against the fence waiting for his son to finally get close enough. I don't know how old Dad was, but we know he's aging. We know he's not just the young guy who does all that the kids do anymore. He's an aging father. It tells us that he made his way to where his son was as he recognized him. He gathered up that robe that the Jewish people wore so that he wouldn't trip. He gathered that thing up and he started to jog toward the direction of his son. And then that jog, as he was getting closer, man, and he couldn't even contain his emotions, he started to run. And he ran to where his son was. He was proactive. And you know what? If we're going to reach the people around us, if we're going to reach people where we work, where we play our sports, if we're going to reach people in this building, you and I are going to have to be proactive. If you and I were to take a straw poll today and figure out and kind of take a poll of how many people have had someone come to them and say, help me, I don't understand God. Can you please give me the answers to life? I mean, that happens very infrequently. We cannot sit and wait for the Son to come over that thing and make his way all the way down that path to us. You and I have to be proactive. As parents, moms, and dads, you and I cannot just hope that everything turns out okay. You and I can't just sit back and say, well, you know, eventually everything's okay. Eventually all kids start to do the right thing. We cannot do that. We can't afford that. We can't hope that somebody else will bring the gospel to our children. We can't hope that the church will be effective enough to reach their kids with the gospel and with the truth. You and I have to do that. We have to be proactive. We have to take matters into our hands. And this father was not going to sit back and just let that happen. He sat at that fence every night and he watched. He had at least one thing to his advantage. He still had hope. And can I say this to all of us? Whatever circumstances that you're facing today, whatever the frustration, whatever the dark cloud that is starting to come over your situation, can I say that you have hope? And until God puts a tombstone on your situation, don't let anybody else do it. Have hope. The father actually thought that his son was dead. He says that in just a few moments. He thought his son had died off somewhere, wasting himself. His parties became too much and he was no longer alive. And when he saw him coming over that hill, that hope came alive to him. And he couldn't even contain it. He gathered the robes up and he took off running. And when you and I finally get that kind of heart for people, when we start to have a heart of compassion, when we see those people in the situation that they're in, whether it's someone who doesn't know Christ or whether it's the children of the church here, and we just want to reach them with the truth of God, we can no longer sit at the fence post and wait for them to come to us. We're going to roll up the sleeves, we're going to gather up the robes, and we're going to take off. We're going to do something to make a difference in these kids' lives. And that's what the father did. He was proactive. Number 2, we see in verse number 20 that he was genuine. It says that he ran and he fell on his neck and he kissed him. No high fives, no fist pumps here. The dad got close enough and he pulled that boy in. Now, I don't know how comfortable you are. I don't know if you're one of the touchy type. I don't know if you're one of those, hey, cool, good to see you. I don't know where you are, but when it comes to a situation like this where you thought he was dead and you find him alive, all that distance stuff isn't going to work. And the dad pulled him in close, and he loved on him. He hugged on his neck. You know what? No one likes to be patronized. No one likes to, have people give a false sense of care or concern. I still remember there was a gentleman out in, and this has happened before, but a gentleman out in Michigan. And this kind of, my wife was walking with one of her friends at the church. And the girl that she was walking with was same age as us, but she was going through some really tough things at work. And she was discouraged. She was actually a little bit teary-eyed, and she was having a struggle. And she walked by this, Kelly and her walked by this guy, and he said to them, he said, "How you guys doing?" And Becky said, "Awful." He said, "Good to see you today." Blew right by. See, because he was in such a habit of just patronizing. It's a way of recognizing that someone else is in my area. Hey, how you doing? We don't really care how you're doing. I mean, if we were to actually say what we're actually feeling, we would say something like that. Hey, I don't know what to say right now, but I'll just say, hey, how you doing? But don't tell me. I don't have time. And if we're ever going to reach people, we have to be genuine. We have to really care. We have to sit down, put down the phone, put down the texting, and look people in the eye once again and say, hey, I am here to listen. What's the situation? What can I do to help you? I think we've lost that. And if we're ever going to reach the children of this generation, if we're ever going to reach the people that we know that don't know Christ at work, listen, we're going to have to genuinely care about them and their situation. And Dad did. Dad took him in and he hugged on him. Then we see this. We see that he was gracious in verse number 22. It says, "But the father said to his servants, 'Bring forth the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet.'" Boy, see, this kid actually did lose everything. He shows up home to the ranch. He doesn't even have shoes on his feet. He doesn't have a coat to wear in the coolness. He has lost everything. And he begins his speech. He had a rehearsed speech that he was practicing before he got home. And in his speech, he was going to say to Dad, hey, listen, I understand I messed up. I don't deserve anything. As a matter of fact, if you'll just take me in, I'm willing to be the servant in the home. I'll do all the chores. I'll stay out in the guest house, just if you'll take me back. And when Dad was hugging on him and his dad started through his tears saying, hey, Dad, I know that I messed up. I know that I sinned against you. I sinned against heaven. And he was about to say, I'm willing to be a slave in your house. The dad stopped him and said to the servants, hey, guys, go get the best robe. Go get that ring that I have set aside for him. Bring out that pair of shoes. And then he said this. He said, bring the fatted calf. Now, I'm not going to pretend to understand all of this, but here's my imagination. I like to imagine things. My imagination that this elderly father, knowing his son was gone, was hoping against hope that he would return. And I'm guessing, here's the owner of the ranch, and he's the one in charge, but I'm guessing that, when the sun was starting to set before he went out to the fence post, I'm guessing that he probably looked around. He went into that one stall at the barn, made sure no one was looking, dumped some extra grain, took off, went back outside. And I'm guessing that day after day, in his hope for his son to return, and in his plan for a celebration when he finally did, that he was spoiling one cow out there that was going to meet its doom. But he fatted the calf up because he was anticipating that his son was going to return. And so he gives to his son what he wanted, but not what he deserved. Isn't that our story? Don't you and I have everything that we don't deserve? Think about the foolish decisions that we've made in life. Think about the things, the ways that you and I have offended a holy God. And God says, I'm going to give you what you don't deserve. And that's what happened with this dad. This dad gave what he didn't deserve. And you know what? If you and I are going to reach people, we're going to have to do the same thing. We're going to have to give people what we think. It may not even be true, but what you and I think this person does not deserve. This person said something hurtful, and what he deserves is my silence. God says, give him something more. If you want to reach him with the gospel, give him something more. Moms and dads, we're going to have to learn to be more forgiving. Yes, we have to build discipline into the situation, all of that, but we have to communicate love. We have to communicate grace. And that's what this young man got, was grace. You know, it's interesting that often it's those ones that wander the farthest, the ones that make the biggest mistakes or the most mistakes are the ones that God seeks for the most. You and I write them off. God seeks them more. And it's often that we find when those people come to the truth and the reality of God in their life, they're the ones that start to become world changers. Those of us who maybe grew up in church and we don't see the radical change in our lives, and I'm not condemning this, I am one of them. But there are times that you and I are so comfortable with the way things are. We're so used to things that we don't really appreciate the grace that God's given to us. And we look at the people beside us that make the small mistakes and we think, well, I can't believe that they would do that. I can't believe they would say that. And there's a father waiting for his son to come home. And when his son came home, he got all that he did not deserve. And if we're going to reach people, we're going to have to give them even what they don't deserve. Now, the struggle with this is the end of the story. And we have this forgiving father, but now let's take a moment to look at the bitter brother. Because this brother does not like what's going on. And look at verse number 25. It says, now his elder brother, or the elder son, was in the field, and he came and drew nigh unto the house, and he heard music and dancing. There's a party going on. And he called one of the servants, and he said unto him, what mean these things? What's going on? In verse 27 it says, and he said unto him, thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he received him safe and sound. And he was angry and would not go in. Therefore came his father out and entreated him. And he answered and said unto him, Father, lo, these many years do I serve thee. Neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment. But yet thou never gavest me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this thy son is come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. And the father looked at him and said, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. See, the older son, his heart was radically different than his dad's. Dad had a heart of forgiveness, a heart of love, a heart of grace. The older brother had a heart of bitterness and selfishness. Two things about him that we learn. Verse number 28, we learned that he was disconnected. It said that he was angry and would not go in. He refused to enter the house. The anger of the brother refused to let him get close. Reading from the beginning of the chapter, we discover that the older brother is in comparison to the Pharisees. Those who were protecting all of the traditions and making sure everything stayed square and clean. They're the ones that became the most critical, the most hateful, and the ones who didn't want to see God do anything different than what he had already done. And what we learn from this is, and I think most of us have already seen this, that the more connected we are with people, the more understanding we are with people. You know, we read in the news about all the situations that happen in our country and all the things, and you and I, as good Monday morning quarterbacks, we have the whole thing figured out, and we have the politics of it figured out, and we know exactly who killed who and why. And we become from a distance, we become very critical of the law enforcement or the judge or the person who perpetrated the crime, whatever it is. We become very critical. And it's often when we get close enough and hear the truth and hear the reality and get close enough with the people that we start to go, oh, maybe I was a little bit quick on my judgment. And maybe you've been there before. But you know what we discover is the people who are the most distant from a situation are the ones who are most critical of what's going on. See, the Pharisees didn't agree with Jesus' approach because they didn't get close to those sinners. They didn't hear their stories of heartache and problems and all the situations they've been through. They didn't even care about that because they weren't connected. They weren't close. And the only time you and I will be any different than the Pharisees is by getting involved. Instead of looking at the person who is having a meltdown at work, as uncomfortable as it may be, ask if there's anything you can do. Maybe leave a note on their desk. You know, you see that person that's having a tough time at Tim Hortons, and man, they are just, and their service wasn't very good. Why don't you write a quick note and say, hey, I hope you have a better day tomorrow. I hope, or whatever it is that you want to say that's kind. But often it's the most disconnected that are the most critical. And if you are not involved somewhere in ministry, in the church, you will discover that you will be one of the most critical. You will be one that finds the most fault in the problems with the way that they've decided to run that children's ministry. I could do that so much better. And we become the ones who know all the answers, but it's because we're not connected. When we get connected, we become more understanding of people. We become more defensive of those people. And we come to their rescue more often. But the older brother was disconnected. And if we're going to be generational missionaries reaching the next generation of kids, then we're going to have to be more connected. We're going to have to get into their lives. We're going to have to be friendly to them. Yeah, they make messes. Yeah, they kick the wall. They leave shoe prints all over the place on the wall, and things get messy and loud. But man, it doesn't matter as much, I've discovered, when it was my own kids, because I'm connected. And if I get connected to those other kids, I'll start to be more understanding. The second thing we see about the older brother was that he was self-centered. In verse number 29, it says, "Lo, these many years do I serve you." Man, in one sentence, as you continue to read that, in one sentence, he uses the word I 3 times, the word me once. 5 times in this one little area, he is selfish. Everything was about him. Everything was what I like and how I like it. And we're all like that. We all have our own comfort zone. I mean, we can walk into every one of our homes today and discover how we like things. What our comfort level is with mess or with cleanness. We can discover that. We can discover how we all live and but we all have these preferences. And what we have to discover as a church is that we're a family. You know, I feel like we raised all 3 of our daughters the same. I think we did. But boy, the outcomes can be so different. The personalities mixing in, and I live with a lady called my wife. I live with a lady who is very, very clean. Everything has its place, and when you take a shirt out, and you're done with it, and you fold it up, you put it back. All of that stuff. But I got to tell you, I'm not going to tell you who. I got kids who didn't get that connection. I mean, they're not there. We're still trying to figure that one out, but that's okay. But you know what? As a family, we've discovered we can get through that mess. We can wander through that dirty room because we're connected. And yeah, we might talk to them about that, but listen, we're not going to reject them because of that. We understand the differences. And too often in a church setting, we allow that little difference to divide us. Man, that's it. I just can't even do this anymore. I don't like the way they do this. I don't like the way they play the music. I don't like the way they, whatever it is. And we allow the differences to divide us as a family. This younger generation, thinking about this younger generation is different than its predecessors. They do choir, or we do choirs, and they do flash mobs. We do face-to-face, and they do FaceTime. We email, they text. We watch TV, they watch Netflix. We dial the phone, they ask Siri. We built a desk for our computer, and they carry their computer in their pocket. And can I say that they appreciate and like flashier music than we do? And they like casual dress more than some of us do. And I sit there and say, no big deal. And until you and I discover a passage or a verse of Scripture that really says this is right and this is wrong, then we have to remember that it's a preference and things are different. You know what I've discovered? I do, the way we did church when I was a teenager, this was a revelation to me. The way we did church as a teenager, when I was a teenager, is actually different than the way my dad did church as a teenager. So here's what I had to admit. My generation made changes, and I'm comfortable with that. But then that next generation comes on and wants to change what I've already determined is the best thing. And I think that we lose sight of the fact that we made changes that we were comfortable with, and now we're mad that other people are trying to make changes that we're not comfortable with. Do you know this? That God's a pioneer of change? Do you know that God wrote what we know to be the New Testament? And aren't you and I glad that we no longer have to carry an animal to slaughter every time I have a wayward thought? Every time I say something hurtful? I'm just glad that God is a pioneer of change. And if it's not something that He's against, then let's push it. Let's encourage and let's get behind them. And when Caitlin was younger, she was about 4 years old, her adventurous spirit kicked in, which if you know her, you know that that doesn't happen very often. She's like me. She's more of the safe, let's do things normal and not keep our feet on the ground. But when she was about 4 years old, she was shopping with her mother, with Kelly, and her adventurous spirit kicked in, and she thought, I'm going to have a game of hide and seek. I'm going to hide, and we'll see who does seek. And now, being that size, she didn't really have to go far. As a matter of fact, she went just around the edge. There was a white support pillar that was there. And so she, as Kelly was going through a rack, she just kind of snuck back and squatted down. She literally sat down in a squatting position. And within seconds, Kelly recognized that Caitlin was no longer next to the stroller. And panic all of a sudden ensued. Now, no Amber Alerts back then, so the old Amber Alert was you run around like a crazy person calling the name and looking down every aisle and through every rack. And as Kelly began to do this frantic search, all of a sudden there was another customer kind of came up to her really reassuringly and said, ma'am, are you looking for a little girl with ponytail? Yeah. She's sitting right over there behind that. Now, here's the thing. In that moment of rescue, when Kelly finally found Caitlin and she picked her up, it was not a time of saying, you bad kid, you shouldn't. You know what it was? It was a time of, I've got my daughter back. I found her. That was a scary moment. And she hugged on her and she held her close. Now, later on, we had discussions about hide and seek. But here's the thing. When our heart is a heart of a rescuer, we don't put the flashlight onto all the problems of the person we're rescuing. That can come later. We can help them with that stuff later. But right now, the concentration is grace, acceptance, and love. And if we are going to reach this next generation, or if we're going to reach the people that we work with that don't know Christ, we're going to have the heart of the Father, not the heart of the older brother. So what can we do? That's the question. What can we do? I want you to think about this. I mentioned that the more involved you and I are, the more accepting, the more we understand. We have to find ways of getting involved. But let me give you these two things. Number one, become a cheerleader. Would you become a cheerleader for anything of reaching the kids of this ministry, the families? What I mean by that is maybe you can find the name of one volunteer that ministers in either the children's wing or the nursery wing or the student ministry wing, and you say during this next 9 months, I'm going to do all that I can to encourage them. I'm going to send them a note. I'm going to pray for them. I'm going to send them a text. I am going to be a cheerleader of that leader. Or maybe you could be a cheerleader of some of the kids and just be one of their fans. Do something that they know that you genuinely care and love them, that you're concerned. So become a cheerleader. Or maybe you can adopt a child, and they're going to be your focus. The person that you are going to do everything you can this year to show that love that we don't even know. They might be getting at home, but we don't know. And we're going to do all that we can. We're going to sing one more song. It's kind of a special, but if you know the words, we're inviting you to sing along with them. But the song is, ask the question, who will rise up? Who will rise up? Of the church, who will rise up? There's a man who said it this way: all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. But let me change it a little bit and say it this way: all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men wait for someone else to do something. And this morning I have 3x5 cards along the stairs and along the back rail. I'm just going to challenge for some of you, if we had a handful of people that would say, I will become a cheerleader. I will do all that I can to encourage people who are trying to reach the kids. I will be a cheerleader of the leaders. I will adopt and this is what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to take one of those cards, write down the name of one of the volunteers that works with children, and maybe the name of a child, and you're going to do what you can over the next school year, the next 9 months, just to be a consistent person that speaks grace and love to reach this generation. The question is, who of us will rise up?